Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Mark Sebastian, COO of Option Pit, with our weekly Vol Q review. Mark, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks. And I really think when we look at the Nasdaq 100, what we seem to be talking about a lot is how it correlates with the 10-year. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on that. And if you're getting any clues from Vol Q.
Yeah, it is basically getting kind of face punched today. Volatility is really coming off kind of across the board. And we're seeing a lot of strength in the Nasdaq 100 as a whole. Apple, Facebook's having a huge day. Google, that there was a Supreme Court decision throwing out a class action lawsuit that I think is really benefiting a lot of the mega caps. And that's causing a pretty strong volatility suck to come out of the Q options and is putting some downside pressure on Vol Q.
And do you think it's simply because of what's happening with the 10-year and the fact that yields are back down, from that 1.7% figure that we saw, or is it just it's also a function of the volatility complex?
I think it's a little of both, right? The 10-year seems to finally be breaking its losing streak. Appears to have found a spot where people are willing to step in, and that is absolutely going to be good for Nasdaq 100 stocks. But when you look at the VIX, which does correlate nicely to Vol Q, there is a ton of downside pressure on volatility as a whole, the entire vol complex, and some pretty heavy pressure on futures in VIX and Vol Q. So that whole complex is getting pushed lower and appears to be heading toward a new level within the vol regime since we've left the crisis about a year ago. We now appear to be starting to come out of that, and we could be heading for a sub 20 Vol Q in the near future. And with that, some of the other complexes could see year lows very shortly.
And Mark, you had mentioned this in a segment that we did last week, just based on the options trades that you're seeing, that they're starting to price this out for the later months in the spring and the beginning of the summer.
Yeah, there is huge downside put buying in the volatility index. The biggest open interest strikes in the volatility index right now are on stuff that is out of the money. I think we would see, if and when they list Vol Q options, you will see very, very similar type of pricing and type of action. Traders have been waiting to see when this volatility complex would start to normalize. We appear to be heading into that as we speak. I think that this week could be very bearish for long vol positions.
And Mark, to wrap up here, we knew in 2020 we were battling a pandemic. Of course, no one foresaw that in the beginning of 2020 or when they were doing their outlook in the fourth quarter of 2019 for what that year would have been like. Of course, we had the national election, which put some uncertainty in the market. Is there anything that's a risk to the the short vol visas or volatility selling off, as you had mentioned earlier? Or is there anything from a fundamental perspective that you have in the back of your mind?
Well, I think the 10-year kind of tells the story, right? If we start seeing some inflation and the Fed is going to have to start raising rates, that is going to probably put a headwind on the market. Markets do not perform well in a rising rate environment, at least while that is going on. Once rates stabilize, they tend to do well. So if we do start to see some inflation and the Fed has to start raising rates, that could be a problem. We're starting to hear some rumblings on, some changes in tax policy. Anytime you start talking about raising taxes, that can be a headwind to markets and bullish volatility. I think either of those could really be a problem. And then finally, the pandemic is mostly over, but not completely. And if we do get a spike in infections, that could cause a problem for volatility. So those are kind of the three things I'm watching. But as a whole, I think that we're heading for a sub 20 vol Q in this quarter.
All right, Mark, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.